Hello my fellow Frosties, my icicles, my snow lovers. Finally, the Mage rework is here. Let's all say goodbye to Rune of Power and hello to, actually being able to do damage and actually to be able to outshine some other DPSers. I'm so happy for the rework to be here, and in this video I wanted to go through the kind of changes, my opinions about them, as well ending up with a little bit of a rotation guide on how to play it in both single target and Mythic Plus. So yeah, let's get right into it. Talking first about, well, I guess the boring part, but the class tree. With the newest rework here, the Mage has actually gotten a lot of new abilities, a lot of new buttons to press, and some pretty good utility. First of all, as the intro, presented, Rune of Power is gone. And thank God, without making it too much of a fuss or too much of a long story or anything, basically, it's resulting in that the Mage is no longer punished for being one of the most mobile casters, with Shimmer. You get to freely move around, you get to reposition yourself, you won't lose damage by repositioning yourself, which we talked about before in the last video about the Mage. That you sometimes just have to, because the tank will just keep on pulling, or something will happen that you need to move, and you will no longer be punished for that. So huge thumbs up from here for that. I think everyone agrees that they love it. Talking about the new things, mainly I would say the three things that are mainly here. The new things are Mass Barrier, Mass Invincibility, and then the talent Ice Cold. They are the ones that really sticking out. So let's go through them first here. So with Mass Invisibility, it gives the Mage a which I really do not understand why a utility such as good as that has been solely kept for the rogue for this long. But finally, another class can offer that same utility. I would argue maybe better. Simply because now you don't have this huge circle that you can go out of. The group would just turn invisible, and you have 12 seconds to go wherever you want to go. There's not much to say about this utility other than it's really situational. It's amazing when you need it, but it's not a talent that you will pick 100% of the time. But it does gives your tank an options when you're doing keys with you. It's gonna give him or her options to do a more safer or less risky pulls by just skipping over the dangerous pulls. So that's great. When you're not picking up Mass Invisibility, the other choice you will pick up is Mass Barrier. On my 442 eye level Mage, Mass Barrier gets the whole group a 121,000 absorb shield. I really love this talent a lot, actually. Not only does it give me a positive interaction with my teammates in the way that I can actually mitigate some group damage to help out healers or help out other DPS players who might be struggling with their defensives or whatever, but it also just creates a second barrier for myself, which gives me personally more defensive. So I sometimes am just using my own barrier. And my other defenses, and when they're running out, well, I have, Mass Barrier that I can just use. Since it's only a 2-minute cooldown, which is honestly not that long. But it is just, again, a barrier. It's not, it won't save your party from a wipe, but it will, because, it will most likely get destroyed by, the first mechanic that's gonna hit it. So it can mitigate that, initial impact, but if you're looking to wipe, this is not an ability that's gonna save you or anything, but it will mitigate something. It's nice just to throw out there, and as I said before, it gives you another defensive. So the only negative I really can say about the barrier and Mass Barrier is that every shield that you mages have, every spec has a different barrier, and the Frost Mage in specific has the weakest, at least in PvE. So not only will you get an absorb shield, but then if you get the enemies that strike it, will get a movement reduction, 20% I believe, which is, again, it's kind of useless in PvE, and especially with Frost Mage, because you are already throwing down blizzards and whatnot. So if the mob can't be slow, well, you are already slowing it. Arcane is actually the one that has the best one, since that one reduces the debuff time on spells and curses on you, and that will give up to the whole like party. That's really actually useful. So the only negative really here is simply just that it's not the same barrier, and arcanes are just better than yours are. But mainly you throwing it on for the absorb shield, and you know that's there. So what else can you do? And here's a little like pro tip. If you're playing as a mage, you can actually activate it just before the mythic like key starts. Like if you have a countdown on, you can do it right before. Everyone will start the key with a barrier, and you won't get it on cooldown, meaning that you can just, the first pull will actually be just a tiny bit a little safer, and you can actually activate it as soon as the barrier goes down again to make it even more safe. Now the thing I was mostly worried about when it came to this class tree part was the talent Ice Cold. So what that was is actually it removes Ice Block, and it instead gives you a 75% damage reduction for 6 seconds. And in my thinking before this, when I was reading the patch notes, I was thinking to myself that it's a lot to ask me to lose up an immunity. I get the whole power thing that you can, the benefit of picking Ice Cold is that you can damage while having this damage reduction. Whereas when you use Ice Block, you were stuck in the Ice Block. You couldn't do any damage or anything. But losing an immunity means that you would not be able to clear any debuffs or anything thrown at you. And again, it is also an immunity, meaning you take, instead of taking 75% damage reduction, you take 100% damage reduction. So I thought it was actually asking a lot of me to pick it. And I knew that I was going to have to do it anyways to stay competitive, because you always have to pick damage over defensive, unfortunately. But actually, in reality, I was really surprised about this. So with a 75% damage reduction, you need to keep in mind 70% is so bonkers. It's so much percent like damage you just don't take. So in reality, where you can't while you can't clear debuffs, for most of the bleeds or poisons or curses, whatever you have, 75 damage reduction for 6 seconds will keep you alive almost like all the time, 100%. It's really rarely you will die with this. So you don't actually in reality lose anything. Like you actually only gain more damage, because you will be able to, as I said, do damage while you have this on. Now with that said, there are still scenarios where you want the Ice Block. This is mostly in raids, and this has to do with, for example, with experiments. There, if you get the bleed debuff, it stays on you permanently unless you use an immunity to cleanse it. So there are definitely still situations where you would want an Ice Block. But for most, especially for Mythic Plus, for most times, you just take the 70% damage reduction and you are so fine. So with that out of the way, let's talk about the Frost Mage. Oh man, oh boy, is the Frost Mage fun right now. It is so incredible. Just to preface this, Blizzard did actually announce a nerf coming to the Mage, but looking at it, we are getting our Blizzard and our Frozen Orb and our Comet Storm initial damage reduced with around 5%. Most of our damage actually comes from Ice Lances and Glacial Spark, and then also the effects that those different spells have. So, Comet Storms give you more damage increase, and Frozen Orb give you the Ice Lance procs. That hasn't been touched. Therefore, these nerfs are actually not going to hit us that hard, to be honest. I think we're going to be very fine for this. We won't probably not even notice it. It's just going to take the very little top edge of our damage off there. So I would really not worry about these nerfs. I honestly think that they are really fair and really grounded, because we are a little bit broken right now this week. So let's get back into Blizzard's rework. I think personally that Blizzard did an amazing job with keeping the feel and the core themes of our rotation intact, while still giving us more abilities and a whole new damage profile almost. And by damage profile, I mean they gave us a burst. So the biggest, one of the biggest changes to our spec has been the change to Icy Veins. Before, Icy Veins was just a 30% haste buff on a 3-minute cooldown with then a lot of cooldown reduction built into your rotations. You would get it off cooldown and just keep going. Now instead, Icy Winds grants you 20% haste. It has a 2-minute cooldown, but now it summons a water elemental that increases your damage done by 3%, stacking up to 15. With our new talent, as I mentioned before, the talent options, Comet Storm giving you an extra 6% damage increase on top of it with the targets you hit, as well as Glacial Spark, which is a really hard-hitting ability. Frost Mage has really gotten a really good burst window now. I don't know if you saw my previous mage video. I was talking a bit about the cons and the pros about playing a mage, and one of my biggest concern or dislike with the mage was the fact that we were missing a burst window. What that means is that what that meant was the lack of burst is just it means that you fall behind if either by your fault or maybe the tank goes AFK for 15-30 seconds. As soon as you stop pulling non-stop, you will lose a ton of overall damage. And you will struggle big time to catch up to the other classes in your group. In order to succeed before on a Frost Mage, you really had to have a tank that pulled big and just constantly was in combat. But now actually having a burst, we can contribute much better in these really important burst windows that we have. I mentioned in my last video, Older Man with the Totem boss, the second boss there. Now we can really hold back our cooldowns for that moment, or we can also hold it back for when the tank wants to pull bigger or more dangerous pulls. That means, yeah, as I said, so if for some reason we go out of combat a little bit, well, we have moments to come back overall and actually benefit the group much more. This change also does mean that our playstyle changed just a tiny bit, I think. Before we would have this thing where we would basically pop Icy Winds as often as we could. It didn't actually matter if the pole was about to die and the mobster was about to die, because you would be able to keep it keep it going into the next pack and keep refreshing it, and also again reducing its cooldown. So it was much more about how many Icy Winds can you get in order to keep up. Now you do have to play it a little bit smarter, just a little bit. You still have to pop it as much as you can, but you definitely want to save it in case something is almost dying and or the tank is going to pull a big pull next time. So overall, amazing changes. But let's go a little bit more into specifics. Let's start with my favorite, the Frost Mage in Mythic Plus. So for 10.1.5, the Frost Mage will be using a talent tree looking much like this right here. So as I mentioned, before, we have new abilities. We have using Comet Storm, Glacial Spark, and then now we're also using Coldest Snap, which will make your Cone of Cold reset the cooldown of Orb and Comet Storm. So if you played Frost Mage before 10.1.5, you'll be used to throwing your Frozen Orb, having your Blizzard come down, that being instant cast, and the Blizzard reducing the cooldown of your Orb, and then your Orb giving you Fingers of Frost procs. And this loop still exists, but now you have a little bit more to throw into it, so it actually becomes just a tiny bit more, I wouldn't say complex, because it's really not complicated or anything. It's just you now use more ability to suppress, which I think is amazing, because before it was a little bit boring, to be honest. So yeah, the rotation is still quite simple. Most of your damage will come from Ice Lances, but now also Glacial Spike, which I mentioned before, which puts all your icicles into one big, and then it will hit your target and another one for 100% of the damage. So that means in AoE you want to throw out as many Glacial Spikes as you can, but only when the ad you're facing is debuffed by Winter's Chill, or when you have Winter's Chill. And you want to make sure when you're throwing out your Glacial Spike that your target is also being hit by Comet Storm, which is, as I mentioned before, it's going to increase your damage. By doing this, you really want to make sure that your Glacial Spark is as hard and as hard hitting as you possibly can get it to. And then the Coldest Cold is actually something that I had to get used to. I thought it was really strange at first, but the more that I played with it, the more I'm just loving it. So what it actually does is just if you hit 3 or more ads with your Cone of Cold, it will reset your Orb, Frozen Orb and Comet Storm's cooldown. What this means is that in the beginning of a pull, you can throw your Orb and your Comet Storm, get the damage increase going, get the Blizzard down, then you can immediately use your Cone of Cold and then have your Orb and Comet Storm up again in an instant. And I've seen, this depends on how big the pull size is, But like this little combo here can definitely put your damage well between like 300 to 500k. I even seen with an augmentation evoker, I've also seen my damage spike up to like 700, but like that's a little bit unrealistic, I think. But yeah, else your AoE rotations actually stays kind of similar to before. You want to throw out your orb, you want to use your Ballista to lower its cooldown, you want to use the Ice Lance procs, and now you want to also just save your Flurry for Glacial Spike. You want to use Icy Veins on cooldown or like as close to cooldown, but still save it if the bosses or the mobs are just like about to die. You want to use Shifting Power on cooldown, even if you're in Icy Veins. And then finally, you want to try and combo Comet Storm, like the damage increase, with either your Orb or your Glacial Spike. I think the Frost Mage has seen maybe the biggest change when you look at raid and single target damage. So in raid or single target content, we use this talent tree or a very similar talent tree. And then again, note, if you're playing raid, there are definitely situations where you want to pick up Ice Block over Ice Cold. Just keeping wary of like, you know, the debuffs and that kind of things. So yeah, the biggest difference or the biggest change is basically just now we won't play the MILF playstyle, which if you weren't aware, that was the one where we were limiting the amount of Ice Lances you would throw. And I've always had this feeling that just felt horrible because that's not the Frost Mage I know. It doesn't feel like I'm playing a Frost Mage. It just feels like I'm playing a Frostbolt Flurry simulator. But no, now we actually go back. We like to be playing we like to be using our Ice Lance procs. But as similar to Mythic Plus, on our action boss, you will now see Comet Storm and Glacial Spark, and then actually Ray of Frost, which we haven't seen in a very long time, and I missed personally very much. Comet Storm and Glacial Spark is the same as we talked before in Mythic Plus. You use Comet Storm to increase the damage, and Glacial Spark is going to be a very hard-hitting ability that you will use every 5 icicles. When you have Winter's Chill up, of course. Now, Ray of Frost, if you're not aware, is a 4-second channel, depending on haste, of course, that its damage will increase the longer you channel it, meaning you do not want to move doing Ray of Frost. You want it to finish the whole cast. When it is finished, it will give you 2 Ice Lance procs. You also want to use Ray of Frost in Winter's Chill's window, because it doesn't actually take a proc, but it will actually get its damage increased. So in order to like not munch your Fingers of Frost, meaning you won't like overlap and losing procs, you want to make sure you use Ray of Frost on the last Winter Chill proc. So your opener in single target would therefore be like, you know, Frostbolt going into a Flurry, popping Icy Veins, using Comet Storm for the damage increase, then an Ice Lance to get down to the last Winter Chill proc, using Ray of Frost, popping out the Ice Lances, and then going into a Frostbolt, into a Flurry, and then Glacial Spike. And then of course you use Orb on cooldown. And then when you're outside of your opener, you kind of similar to the M+, you want to save Flurry for Glacial Spike, so you get that on the Winter's Chill. You want to actually be careful though, because you want to think about traveling time here. Glacial Spike works the same way as Frostbolt does, so you can actually use Glacial Spike into a Flurry combo. That will actually is better for you, because then you will get 2 Ice Lance procs. Or at least you can use 2 Ice Lances in your Winter's Chill rather than just 1. But it also means that if you're using your Glacial Spike on the last Winter's Chill proc, and you use if you use a Glacial Spike on your last Winter's Chill, and then you actually throw in an Ice Lance, the Ice Lance will travel faster and consume that proc rather than the Glacial Spike. So you want to be really careful you don't like eat up the procs. And then the other like, you know, thing to our rotation is now, again, you have the Comet Storm and you have Ray of Frost that was going to come off cooldown during your boss pulls, during the combat. Every 30 seconds or so, depending on your use of Shifting Power and again haste, you get Comet Storm off cooldown. Super simple. You want to use it after every Flurry. So you use either your Glacial Spark into Flurry combo, or you use your Frostbolt into Flurry combo, and then you use Comet Storm right after, and then use your Winter's Chill procs. And with Ray of Frost, you do the same thing. So you use your Flurry combo, use Comet Storm, use one of the Winter's Chill procs, either on Ice Lance or Glacial Spark, and then you use Ray of Frost, and then you just consume the last 2 procs. And then it's also important to know that if it is possible, use your second Time Warp to match it with your second Icy Mains. If that's not possible, then just use it after 40 seconds. So, you know, situations like that would be maybe the last boss of, like, not the last boss, but like Assault in Aberrus, where most people will lost in like the second phase when the boss is like around those 30% health, something like that. If you're playing on lower difficulties, maybe you won't get it up by time. So if you won't have it up for the second Icy Mains, then just use it after 40 seconds. And then of course use Shifting Power on cooldown. Again, even in Icy Mains. So yeah, there you have it. That's the Frost Mage right now. I want to say, like, even after all the nerfs, the 4 nerfs that's coming, the Frost Mage is looking really good. Our rotations have received some more abilities to press. That's awesome because it was really, really simple. You only, as for a long time, at least in AoE, you only had like 3 abilities to use. So having more, they actually, in my opinion, managed to give the Frost Mage a lot more things to do without it feeling clouded or like overwhelming in any way. Stuff that kept it simple yet gave it much more. And then with the Icy Veins change, with Comet Storm and Glacial Spark, we, as I said before, we actually got a burst window, which creates a lot of like possibilities for the mage to be more competitive with other specs. And then, you know, you can't hate on losing Rune of Power, and you also can't hate on actually in single target we get to use our Fingers of Frost procs. So I think it's a little bit too early to say if Frost Mage is going to end up being, it doesn't have to be the best spec or just the best mage spec, but the new damage profile means that, you know, a really good Frost Mage will be able to outshine almost every other like DPS specs. Like it's feeling really, really good. Comment below if you have played the Frost Mage and what you think of the Frost Mage. And I hope if you are considering that this might push you over. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.